I'm Emma Lupich, and you're watching Can TV. We're here today with Nikki Cole from One Fair Wage. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
So can you talk about the campaign for One Fair Wage and then the work that the organization itself does?
Sure. One Fair Wage is a national civil rights organization. Our mission is to raise the wage for sub-minimum wage workers to the full livable minimum wage. We want $15 across the board, plus tips on top for workers. That is our mission. A lot of people don't know that right now in 43 states in America, including in Illinois, there is a sub minimum wage, an actual below the minimum wage rate that a lot of employers in the service sector, particularly the restaurant industry, are allowed to pay employees with the understanding that tips are going to make up the difference of that minimum wage. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. It's something that's really hard to track, where we find a lot of wage theft occurs, especially when people don't make that full minimum wage. So our mission is really to make the industry more equitable for all by increasing wages and rethinking how tips are distributed. So we are, like I said, national. We are here, we're in Illinois, but we're also working on legislation and organizing workers who are impacted by the COVID pandemic in other states like New York and Pennsylvania, Florida, the DMV area, California, Michigan, and elsewhere. So there's a lot of work to be done.
And so the federal minimum wage is at $7.25 right now. So how is it legal to pay American workers below that $7.25?
Well, the concept of the sub-minimum wage originated way, way back in the 1860s, right after emancipation. Pullman, the train car porters, and the restaurant industry lobbied to say we would like to hire newly free slaves, but not give them a wage. They'll just rely on tips. So this idea is actually rooted in Jim Crow era politics. And so the first sub minimum wage legally was $0 for newly freed slaves. And on the Pullman car porters, it was a lot of Black men who occupied, but in the restaurants, it was a lot of Black women who occupied those positions, who were already accustomed to domestic work, right, pre-emancipation. And then, of course, as we all know, farm workers and domestic workers also got no minimum wage at the time. So from that time period all the way till now, the sub minimum wage has risen a whole whopping $2.13. That's what it is currently today federally, which is really nothing. It's nothing. So there are some states that have a higher sub minimum wage than $2.13, but it varies from state to state. Some just use the flat $2.13, a lot of southern states in particular. And then there are other states like New York that have a sub minimum wage of $10, where their overall minimum wage is $15. But of course, the cost of living in New York is very high, so it varies from place to place, but overall we're shooting for one fair wage in each state, and ultimately federally as well.
Okay. And so Black Women's Equal Pay Day was on August 13th, which just passed. So can you just talk a little bit about what that means?
So there's a race and gender wage gap in this country, from our legacy of inequities, and we're working steadily to overcome those. Black Women's Equal Pay Day is one of many women's equal pay days in a series of days throughout the year to uplift that wage gap. And it was in August because across the country it's about an average in all different industries of about an $8 per hour pay gap difference for Black men, Black women and their white male counterparts. So this past Black Women's Equal Pay Day, we uplifted the sub minimum wage, in particular because of the COVID pandemic. And so across the board in the service industry, well, in Illinois, there's about a $3.55 per hour wage gap between front of the house restaurant workers who are white men versus those who are Black women. And the front of the house, like over 70% are women, right? Occupied positions. So the front of the house, the servers, the bartenders, hosts, etc., are largely women filled positions, and a lot of Black women. So anyway, it's a $3.55 wage gap difference in Illinois. And what that really means is that Black women in the industry are earning about 76% of what white men earn in the industry. So we're trying to uplift that in particular, and its impact really not just on an individual Black woman, but how that translates out into the community, and what we think solutions are for that.
Right. And so the report also details discriminatory hiring practices, which essentially keep Black women specifically in the lowest paying jobs within the restaurant sector. So can you explain those findings further?
Yeah, so there's numerous ways that racial and gender discrimination play out in the industry, right? So one way, so restaurants there's occupational segregation first. That's one way, right? And so we find disproportionately Black women in quick serve and casual restaurants versus fine dining restaurants, right? Where the menu price points are higher and tips are typically higher, right? So there's that. You're going to find just that. Excuse me. Given less opportunities, right, to even get into the higher end restaurants where there is more opportunity to make money. Then you'll find even when we do make it to the higher end restaurants, we still face discrimination in scheduling, section preference, right? We also face gender discrimination. And, in every restaurant that I ever worked at, there was always like the good sections and the not so good sections. There's the places by the windows or out on the patio that's on and popping where people want to sit all the time, to make it look like this place is, exciting, where consumers want to be, right? They keep things full. So like a lot of the times they'll put the lightest skinned people up front there and keep them busy, whereas a Black woman may have the back section, right? That doesn't even get as much opportunity of turnover. And then the other thing is just facing discrimination based on consumers, right? Like individuals, like tipping is the decision of the consumer, right? If they're going to tip at all, how much that they're going to tip, and it's something that is shaped by that person's biases, right? And so we also find that in our research over the years that white men are often tipped more for giving the same exact quality service than women counterparts. So those are all reasons that we are fighting for one fair wage, to reduce that pay gap and the impacts of discriminatory tipping.
COVID-19 has turned the whole restaurant industry on its head. So how are these kind of pre-existing issues within the industry just amplified then by the pandemic?
Yeah. So prior to the pandemic, you have restaurant workers, a lot of them living in precarious situations already, living tip to mouth on day-to-day a day to day, really, right? With, am I going to make enough money to eat today? Can I scrape enough together today to pay my phone bill, right? Like really living on a day to day basis, not even paycheck to paycheck. Now that the pandemic has happened, so many restaurant workers have applied for the One Fair Wage Emergency Fund because they need cash relief because they have been denied unemployment insurance. The government is telling them, you actually didn't make enough money to qualify for unemployment insurance, even though they paid taxes into it. So in the restaurant industry, for a lot of folks that may not know, for tipped employees, you oftentimes get a paycheck that says $0. This is not a tip, or I'm sorry, this is not a paycheck, because that $2.13 or whatever, it accumulated, but it goes to taxes. So you literally just live off of your tips. So so many hospitality workers are straight up being denied unemployment insurance because of the sub minimum wage, which is to us just, you know, ridiculous. It's another reason. It's like, well, it shouldn't exist in the first place. The minimum wage is the minimum wage for a reason. So when we started the One Fair Wage Emergency Fund, it was a flood of emails from workers saying, thank you so much for starting this. You know, I need this relief. Like, how can I expedite this process along, right? Like hopeful, but still frustrated. In August now, the emails have turned into complete desperation. People that still aren't getting unemployment insurance or didn't get their pandemic relief are facing starvation, are facing eviction, are not able to afford gas to get to food pantries, are facing their internet and phones being cut off. It's a really bad situation right now. And workers in states like California, for example, that already have just one fair minimum wage, they are getting unemployment insurance, which still isn't great, right? I'm not saying that living on unemployment insurance is what anyone wants, but it is the difference between surviving or not for a lot of people.
What happens too with workers that at least I've been hearing is you're put in a situation where you have to make the decision between going back to a job where, let's say, you don't feel safe, there isn't enough PPE, with cut hours. So that was something that the report talked about as well. So with the pandemic, the hours that people are getting are, I think it's at up to 40% less.
It's a really messed up situation. We have a nice group of phenomenal leaders of service professionals in Illinois. So we're checking in with them regularly, and some of them are being called back to work for only like 10 hours a week. And tips are down across the board, 50 to 70%. So it's not enough. It's just not enough for people to get by. The restaurant is struggling itself to figure out, how do we operate? How do we pivot in this moment? And workers are trying, you know, who love their bosses and their industries are trying to be supportive, but are angry that they are not being supported necessarily with paid sick days, with pandemic pay, with provided PPE, and that some people are coming to dine out and sit on patios without protective gear on, and they're expected to still like give hospitable service. So it's not a good situation, and it's why we need relief for especially for small restaurateurs, to be able to have some cash relief, to have a operating costs, to like figure this out. In the meantime, to be able to pay their employees that they are calling back to work, to support them through this, a full livable minimum wage, to be able to provide consistent PPE, to be able to offer paid sick days in this time, like they need relief. And so that's what we're really fighting for now in a lot of different places. We're organizing both workers and employers who have good intentions, who like want to do the right thing and figure this out. We're bringing them together to create joint proposal for one fair wage and government subsidies, essentially, for employers who intend to move to one fair wage and provide the benefits that are necessary to get through this moment.
Right. And so you talked about the One Fair Wage Relief Fund. Can you just expand upon that?
Yes, in March of this year, we started the One Fair Wage Relief Fund. Initially, it was just for workers who were impacted by the COVID pandemic. We had no idea what was going to happen with the pandemic or fundraising. We started off with $10,000, and within several months, we raised nearly close to $30 million. We had to develop some serious infrastructure quickly. We started paying out restaurant workers $500 in one-time relief funds. I think at this point, we've paid out close to 35,000 workers across the country in need. And we are still trying to raise more money, but we are really focused on the election at this point. But we have a fabulous High Road directors team comprised of Jeannie and Mikey and Shamila, and they are working with employers across the country to organize, to put together High Road Kitchens proposals in San Diego, in I think Detroit, in New York, and we're trying in Washington, D.C. I know we're working on it everywhere we are, in Illinois too. We've raised money. So we have an emergency fund for employers too, right? It was just for workers, but now it's grown, and we have it for employers. And in these different locations, we are giving out $25,000 cash grants to small independent restaurateurs who agree to pay one fair wage and provide PPE and paid sick days to their employees, and who are also feeding their employees and taking care of other essential workers in this time. So that program is working phenomenally in New York. We really hope to bring that to Illinois. And we're also organizing and talking to different restaurateurs who have opposed one fair wage before. Different folks are now seeing the structural problem with the sub minimum wage, because some of the people they love and care about are not making tips, are on the verge, right, of starvation and homelessness in a lot of facts. So a lot of unlikely players are coming around and employers are coming around to advocate for one fair wage and talking about needing some payroll subsidies, right, and other different solutions to make it work for the time being. So right now is a really horrible time, but it's been this strangely weird and miraculous portal to reimagining new possibilities for the long term.
Right. And you brought up those High Road Kitchens. Can you just explain further what those are?
Yeah. So the High Road Kitchens program is basically a program that we started in response to COVID, where employers who, again, agree to move to one fair wage, a full minimum wage for all of their employees, plus tips on top, which includes tip sharing, right? Mm-hmm. They move to that and are also providing protective equipment for people to do business safely, instituting social distancing, all of those things to keep people safe, and who are continue to feed their employees and also essential workers in the area. They apply for this program, they can get a $25,000 cash grant like immediate assistance to keep operating through the pandemic, which is for a lot of independent restaurateurs has been like a lifeline to keep operating through this time, and to actually have the brain space, right, without the constant influx of business, to refigure out what their long-term business model is going to be. So I recommend folks check it out. High Road Kitchens. You can Google it. I think it's highroadkitchens.org.
Okay. So what is next for One Fair Wage and the work that you guys are doing right now? And then also, if people want to apply for those One Fair Wage relief funds, how would they do that?
For employers, go to highroadkitchens.org. For workers, you can go to ofwemergencyfund.org and apply for relief, or apply to volunteer to help us make calls, or also send people that you know who have it to be able to donate, so we can keep growing the fund. Because who knows when the next COVID pandemic is going to happen, honestly. So those are two places, but what One Fair Wage is up to now. So we're continuing to try to grow this High Road program. So we're continuing to talk with and collaborate with employers. We're also continuing to organize. We're having conversations with people who are impacted by COVID, tip service workers, and really just learning about their struggles, their opportunities, their ideas, what their vision of the future is, and we are inviting them to advocate for One Fair Wage legislation. Legislative seasons are coming up, some emergency sessions in different states now, and then of course in January. So we are getting ready to take action for what we need. Also, the election is coming up, and so we're having conversations with tip restaurant workers about voting, and we're having conversations with them about this issue. It's not particularly about this candidate or that candidate. It's really about, you need to get registered to vote and go out and vote on this issue. Vote yourself a raise. Know who is for giving you a raise, and know who voted against it or doesn't care about it before, because those are the people who are going to pass this legislation or work with us in order to create these structural changes. And it's really, really important for tip service workers to vote, because we are the low propensity voters. We are the people who in every other election are working 2 and 3 jobs. We literally don't have time to vote. We are always at work. And then we oftentimes live in places that the regular folks that knock on doors they can't get to. We're in apartment buildings and stuff like that, or we're just not home. So this election is crucial for us to turn out and vote. So we're encouraging people to make an impact this election.